Welcome to the Deep Dive, where today we're diving into, well, a really tense situation that's unfolding in the Middle East right now. We're trying to get to the bottom of, these accusations that Israel deliberately attacked UNIFIL personnel in Lebanon.
Right.
And to do that, we're going straight to the source. We've got excerpts from Prime Minister Netanyahu's own statement. Actually, there are two slightly different versions, which we're going to unpack and see if we can sort of figure out what's going on.
It's a high-stakes situation for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got Israel obviously facing, what they see as a very real and immediate security threat.
Right.
And then on the other side, you have UNIFIL, a peacekeeping force, stuck in the middle of a conflict where it's really hard to even see where the lines are.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so important, trying to figure out, did Israel actually target UN peacekeepers on purpose, or is there more to it?
Is there more to the story? Yeah. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Well, I think to really grasp how serious these accusations are, we have to look at just how complicated the whole region is.
Yeah.
Hezbollah, right? Powerful militant group, operates within Lebanon, considered a terrorist organization by many countries. Their attacks on Israel are a constant threat.
Right.
And of course, Israel believes it has the right to defend itself, to protect its people. That's where UNIFIL gets caught in the crossfire, trying to keep a lid on things in an environment where conflict is practically guaranteed. I mean,
it's got to be an impossible job, almost.
Almost, yeah.
One of the things that jumps out at me from Netanyahu's statement is he keeps saying over and over that Israel urged UNIFIL to evacuate the combat zone. Get out for their own safety, right?
Right.
He even mentions specifically asking them to withdraw temporarily from a certain area on the very same day that Israel launched ground operations near the Lebanese border. Is that standard procedure in these kind of situations? Yeah.
See, that's where things get murky. It makes sense, right, that a country wants to keep peacekeepers out of harm's way during a military operation.
Right.
Less risk of accidental casualties.
Sure.
Makes their own, tactical decisions a bit cleaner. But when you're that direct, asking peacekeepers to withdraw, it can look like
you're trying to influence what they're doing.
Exactly. And that can be seen as, challenging their neutrality.
And neutrality is the whole point of peacekeeping, right?
It's the foundation. If one side can dictate UNIFIL's movements, even with the best intentions, it undermines their entire mission.
Because then it raises these questions about, well, who is UNIFIL really there to protect?
Exactly. It creates this perception of bias, erodes trust with all sides. And in a situation like this, that can have very real consequences for UNIFIL's safety and their ability to actually do their jobs effectively.
We're already starting to see how even just trying to do the right thing can really backfire.
Oh, absolutely.
In this kind of environment. There's another thing Netanyahu says that I thought was interesting. He mentions that Hezbollah launched an attack on Israel on October 8th.
Okay.
The day after the Hamas massacre.
Oh, wow.
What do you make of that timing? Is there strategic reason he's pointing that out, do you think?
It's interesting. It really emphasizes the timeline here.
Yeah.
Because by linking those two, Hezbollah's attack right after the Hamas massacre, it's like he's drawing a straight line between them.
Yeah, it feels very deliberate.
Right.
It's like he's saying, look, we're already dealing with this huge crisis.
Right.
And now we've got this to deal with on top of it.
Exactly. It's introducing this element of chaos, of urgency.
Right.
It makes it hard to separate what intention from reaction. And that's really important to keep in mind as we go through the rest of his statement.
For sure. He also claims that Hezbollah uses UNIFIL facilities and personnel as shields when they attack. Is that a common tactic? And how does that affect peacekeeping efforts?
It's more common than we'd like to think, unfortunately.
Really?
Especially in densely populated areas.
Yeah.
These groups, they try to blend in, get close to international organizations for a sense of protection.
So they're using UNIFIL as Humi shields, essentially.
Essentially, yes. Which puts the peacekeepers in an impossible situation.
Right, because their job is to protect civilians.
Right.
Which would mean staying put.
But staying put puts them directly in the line of fire.
It's a no-win situation. If they stay, they risk getting caught in the crossfire.
Right.
But if they leave, they're abandoning their post.
Exactly. It highlights just how impossible their job is, often working with limited resources, trying to stay neutral in this incredibly volatile environment.
It really makes you realize how fragile peace is, especially when it feels like one side is actively taking advantage of it.
Absolutely. And we should remind our listeners, this is just a small part of what Netanyahu said.
That's right. These are excerpts.
Always good to look at the full picture, come to your own conclusions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, make sure you join us for part 2 of this deep dive where we're going to continue breaking down Netanyahu's statement and really get into what these accusations could mean and the bigger picture of UNIFIL's role in the region. This is going to be good. Welcome back to the Deep Ducks. We're picking up right where we left off, looking at Prime Minister Netanyahu's response to these accusations that Israel deliberately targeted UN peacekeepers.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, as we go deeper into this, to remember the gravity of what we're talking about here. This isn't just about military strategy.
Right.
These are very serious accusations with moral and legal implications.
Absolutely, because it sets a precedent.
Exactly.
And, what happens, from a legal standpoint, what happens if a country is found to have intentionally targeted peacekeepers?
Well, that's the thing. It's incredibly difficult to prove intent in these situations. And even if you have evidence of wrongdoing, international law, it can be slow.
Yeah.
There are often political roadblocks.
So it's a matter of who has the most influence.
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. International pressure, maybe sanctions, even war crimes tribunals, those are possibilities in extreme cases.
Right.
But those are last resorts.
Yeah.
It's never that clear cut.
It's like a high-stakes chess game. Where every move has these huge consequences that go way beyond just the immediate conflict.
Exactly. And those ripple effects are exactly why we need to be so careful when we analyze this, because it's not just about what happened, it's about why it matters on a global scale.
Right. And getting back to Netanyahu's statement, where we're talking about, his claim that Hezbollah uses UN facilities and personnel as shields. So what do you do when a peacekeeping force is essentially being used as a pawn?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. It challenges the very core of what peacekeeping is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Neutrality, right? That's paramount. Their mandate is not to pick sides or engage in combat unless it's self-defense, or to protect civilians in immediate danger.
So they can't just pull out if they know they're being used.
It's not that simple. Withdrawal, it could be seen as abandoning their duty, which could escalate the violence, put more lives at risk.
It's that classic, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Exactly. It highlights the need for clear communication, transparency, de-escalation. And to get that in a situation like this, it's incredibly challenging.
So we've got these accusations, right? But there's also this thing where Netanyahu mentions 2 slightly different versions of events.
Right.
Now, we don't have the full text of both, but have you noticed any discrepancies? And if so, what do you make of them?
You're right to focus on that. Even small differences in how things are worded can be very telling. Unfortunately, without seeing both statements in full.
Right.
It's hard to say for sure, but it does raise some red flags.
Red flags, how so?
Well, anytime you see inconsistencies in official statements, especially about something like this, it makes you wonder about transparency.
Yeah.
Whether there are attempts to kind of shape the narrative.
Right. Like, are there details missing from one version compared to the other?
Exactly.
Yeah. This just adds another layer to an already complicated situation.
It does, and it shows how important independent investigations are.
Right.
Looking at all the evidence.
And that's what we're trying to do here, is give our listeners the information they need.
Absolutely.
To make up their own minds. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm left with this question. If Hezbollah is using UNIFIL as a shield, does that mean Israel is off the hook if civilians get hurt or if UN facilities get damaged during their operations? It's a tough question, and one we'll dig into in the final part of our deep dive, so stick with us. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're in the final stretch now of our analysis of Prime Minister Netanyahu's response, trying to get to the bottom of these accusations that Israel deliberately attacked UNIFIL.
And I think as we kind of tie this all together, it's good to come back to that central question.
Of intent.
Right.
Did they know?
Did Israel knowingly target UNIFIL? Or, as Netanyahu says, were they focused on Hezbollah, even if it meant, there might be other consequences?
Because that's a huge difference. And it's not just like a legal question.
Right.
It's a moral one, too.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really complicated. International law, it does allow for some degree of force, in self-defense.
Right.
But there are limits.
Like what?
Well, there's this idea of proportionality.
Okay.
The force you use, it has to make sense compared to the threat you're facing. You can't just, unleash a massive attack that causes tons of civilian casualties if the initial attack was minor.
Right.
So to figure out if what Israel did was justified, you'd have to look at the scale of Hezbollah's actions and then the harm to UNIFIL, the personnel, the facilities.
And that's where it gets difficult, right? Getting all the information.
Exactly. Investigations like this, they're so complex, often very secretive. Each side wants to control the story.
Of course.
Which makes it really hard to find the truth.
And that brings us back to those two versions of Netanyahu's statement.
Right.
Even small differences matter.
They do.
Because it makes you wonder what's not being said.
Exactly.
You've given us a lot to consider today. As we wrap up, what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all of this?
Don't expect easy answers, that's for sure. It's easy to point fingers, but the reality is it's complicated. Every action has a reaction. Every decision has consequences.
It's about understanding that bigger picture, right?
Yes, and that means, looking past the headlines, questioning what you think listening to different perspectives, even if you don't agree with them.
And remembering that there are real people caught in the middle of this.
Exactly. Israelis, Lebanese, caught in the crossfire. Never forget that.
Couldn't have said it better myself. As always, we encourage you to check out the source material, come to your own conclusions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.